Hi there and welcome back to the Live Good Enough podcast. I'm Ross, this again is Joe, and today we are again going to dive into some of the articles we've been sharing on Live Good Enough this week. If you're new here, Live Good Enough is a platform where we share articles every weekday, and they're really all around successful modern living with balance. So the non-prescriptive, they're just trying to get you into a conversation, give you that little nudge on some things you may be speaking about between your friends and your family, or maybe some of the stuff you're not speaking about that we can kind of introduce you to. But before we get into that, let's do our regular check-in. Joe, you've been on the golf course today. How was that?
Oh, do you know what? It was long overdue. I have to say, I haven't played golf for I'd say over a month, which I suppose isn't that long. But for me, I love my golf, and so it was lovely. It was a really good treat. Played with some mates I haven't seen for a while, and it was on a charity golf day, and just a really nice day. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm feeling very, and I've just had a lovely sort of barbecue with kids and family.
Yeah, good. Thank you. You know, if you listen to this and you're not in the UK, we've had some good weather, which is quite rare for us. And we say that even in the end of July and beginning of August. So we haven't had the best weather up until now, but now we're getting it in droves. And today is actually, I think, probably the hottest day of the year today. Today it was great for me. I just working from home today. It was a little bit warm, so windows open, lots of cold drinks and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was good. How do you find playing golf in the heat? Does that kind of mess your game up a little bit, or are you okay?
Do you know, today, it was unbelievably warm, like for the UK. But I suppose, yeah, it's a bit. No, I loved. I didn't play very well, like normal. I'd say I wasn't as good as I would have hoped, but I didn't let that bother me. And yeah, that leads into our first topic
enough.
Actually. Well, I suppose, but also even failure.
Yeah, definitely. So the first one we're going to dig into today is all about failure, and specifically how to reframe setbacks as learning opportunities. And the article speaks about, we hear it all the time, failures are just learnings, reframe your failures to what can you learn from them. But that's, easier said than done sometimes. When you're in the thick of it, of something that hasn't gone your way, how do you kind of get your mind back into kind of a more positive state? So the article goes through around what reframing is, and it's kind of, if you haven't come across that term before, it's the art of changing your perspective on a situation to view it in a more positive or at least neutral light. And it says here in the article it says, imagine looking through a window, the scene outside doesn't change, but the way you view it can, depending on the frame. So thinking about our failures in that way. Joe, your experiences of those times when you've had some level of failure, maybe more recently or in the past, how does that differ from how you used to see it to how you see it today, do you think?
I think what I'd say is I'm still learning and on that journey of how a relationship with failure. I think personally, I don't think I can say like I've mastered that by any means. And for me, I acknowledge that I definitely have changed my perspective, I think, on failure. And certainly, it's really funny. This first company I ever joined was called, we all have like sayings or things, and literally one of them, failure. So that was literally the thing that they wanted everyone to embrace, because it was a creative agency. However, the irony is that was obviously not what anyone would accept, or that everyone would striving for perfection probably was closer to it. Except I'm not using the culture there, but I do think there's a chat. There's certainly been in my experience, particularly in the place of work, and a lot of areas of life, like this quite challenging relationship with failure. And viewing any failure as very personal. And so I think the work that I'm doing and will be doing is to try and reframe failure in exactly the way that I suppose it was described in the article. I wouldn't say not that I disagree. I definitely think that there's because I think I like the thing of reframing. I have to say, I think there is also taking responsibility and owning your fault, or something else. And then again, I think the main thing is about learning from it. So forget, I almost like I take the sort of the bits of not trying to diminish or shatter self-confidence through failure and looking to progress with it, but doing so in a way that also can acknowledge that there are failing things that you are not happy about, or that you have done wrong, maybe, and that you will, and as long as, I suppose, behaviour is the thing to really look at, because but again, it's still very personal to me, but I can, if I say something, that's not just learning from it. Like, I haven't, if I've reframed it and I say, I now don't believe X, but then my behaviour shows different, I still haven't learned the thing. I'm still doing it. So I think the concept of failure and of reframing can be applied to lots of different things. Obviously, it can be applied to work. It can be applied to what have you found with it?
I think there are a couple of things that stick out for me. The first thing being that sometimes the water can be muddied by things that are within our control and without of our control. Sometimes you spoke there about taking ownership, and sometimes we can take ownership for things that we have no control over, and that can be seen as part of that failure, I think, sometimes. So it's kind of, for me, that's a kind of first stage in kind of thinking, was this failure, can I have ownership over what I deem this failure to be, or was it something that was out of my control? Because identifying that and kind of splitting it down the middle sometimes gives me some clarity around, okay, maybe I couldn't have done that in that time or that area. But that's the worst thing. I think for me myself, I think I kind of go through a stage where something could happen, and which I deem might be a failure, and I almost have to kind of let that go through my body in a way. I kind of, I think in the past what happened was I would sit with whatever I deemed was a failure, and it would get stuck. I could feel it get stuck here. I could feel it get stuck here. And what I found, through going through different therapies and stuff like that, is that I almost, in myself, my personal way of being able to kind of to accomplish that is to let it just flow through me, because that feeling is the blockage of it. I'm holding on to it. I can't let it go. So there's some ways that I can go through that, mindfulness meditations, that kind of stuff, which will enable me to kind of, if I'm able to relax my body, then I can just kind of feel it. It's a weird thing. You can just kind of feel it go out of yourself. But I like that. I'm quite a visual person in that way, and if I can imagine it sort of coming in and going out, that tends to work for me. My brain kind of believes it. Oh, this is happening. This is this must be true. But it is tricky. As you said as well. Certainly I feel I've got better at it. But these things just catch you. Sometimes there'll be one sort of challenge or failure that maybe doesn't kind of hold on to maybe your values, your emotions, and all that kind of stuff. Then maybe another one. An example for that could be work versus personal stuff, or that kind of thing. You may have a different attachment to that failure. So it is tricky. And the article speaks also about, it name checks Elizabeth Day. She's got a great podcast called How to Fail. If you haven't checked that out, I'd recommend checking that out. It's where she speaks to various people of note, and they talk about 3 failures and how they've kind of worked through it. That's a good one to look at as well. And the article also speaks to some of the benefits of, if you can try to kind of reframe it, things like your personal growth, your resilience. Resilience is key, I think, in that kind of building that muscle, if you can, in some areas, is really helpful, should I say. And it goes through some practical steps on that as well. But it's a tricky one, isn't it?
I suppose it's not to counter what we've just been saying, but also to say it's not to focus as there's a part of it we said, like the whole approach from a good enough perspective is not to focus as much on failure, and we're also not saying that we should become, we need to analyze every failure and look for it in any way. And actually this is just a case of, like, if we're at a point where we consistently see a certain, for me anyway, the way I'm looking at it is, if there's consistently something that's going on, there are patterns that are being embedded, I would say, over years. And I can talk about personal, or I can talk about work. For me, particularly probably work. and my relationship to that, and how that impacted my own behaviours within work, impacted my relationships at home, and also my burnout, for example. And like a lot of that could be seen as failure, because I kept on repeating a cycle in 18-month cycles or whatever. But actually, I would say that I'm in a period of like coming out of that and acknowledging it, so actually learning from the failure. But again, it's not a case of, I think we have to, it's not to say it should overwhelm us by constantly thinking and analysing the failures that we have had or haven't, but I think one of the things that really sort of jumped out at me when you were describing the sort of feeling going through you was about a feeling of acceptance, whatever that means to you.
I think a big part of that, again speaking personally, was, for such a long period of time, if there were failures or things that came up, I would be very insular in that thing, so it wouldn't be something that would be shared, or you wouldn't necessarily know that others have similar challenges or similar things going on. And once you are in a position where you're in an environment where you're either sharing, or you acknowledge that other people go through the same, or just having that person or someone to speak to where you can say, look, based on the situation, what tools did I have at that time? What tools did I have in that moment? Now, would it be understandable for someone who had those tools faced with that problem to maybe react in a similar way, And when I think there's a big element of self-compassion that comes with that, where if you can learn to kind of basically just give yourself a day off, with some of this stuff, that you can really, it feels like the weight is taken off your shoulders a bit. Okay, that's okay, and that's another big subject. We pick these big subjects, and we could go on forever, but we need to go on. We need to speak about something else. So this one is all about alcohol, and we're speaking specifically in the UK, but I think this is a worldwide kind of trend. Are more people embracing alcohol-free beverages? In a time where the industry is at a high, through alcohol free beverages. If you think back so many years ago, there used to be one option of an alcohol-free beer at a pub, and that used to taste completely horrid. There was no thought put into it. It was just whatever they did to it, it wasn't very tasty, and it wouldn't taste like the equivalent alcoholic beverage. If you've had the opportunity to try some of non-alcoholic beverages today, they're amazing. There's a lot of thought and effort that's been put into them, and if they have an equivalent, alcoholic brother or sister, they do taste very similar. So the article was speaking about kind of why are we now maybe choosing non-alcoholic beverages in regards to alcoholic beverages. Your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I mean it's quite a big one for me, and readdressing sort of, I suppose, the relationship and my drinking far less. So my relationship, but in relationship to this, much more familiar, and fully on board with the sort of the alcohol-free movement as it is, and I suppose going a step further, like trying to, even though I know we're talking about potentially alcohol-free an alcohol substance. And actually, what we're saying is that there are really good, very good now comparable products on the market from a taste perspective, but that don't have any of the downsides. So again, personally, awful hangovers, was constantly sick, and couldn't really function well as a dad if I was to drink too much. And I've always had a challenge around I wouldn't say I've ever had any sort of dependency issues, but certainly around binge drinking, like 100%. Brought up in a culture from a university point of view, more than anything, that was very heavy on binge drinking. So a lot of that reflected then into the way in which I would socialise. And I think the big thing I've found challenging has been the fear of being judged by peers when you're in a bar and you don't want to drink. And that's still something that I face a lot. And so having very good alcohol-free options that still look the same is a way of masking that if you don't want to say it, as well as not. And I'm in the article was Big Drop, Suffolk, where we're both from, a Suffolk brand, and the options that they have are fantastic, like a wholly alcohol-free beer. Or, again, similar to, we have our own one at Talk Club, which we've been finding to combat, men's mental health by creating an alcohol-free beer, and raising awareness that way. But there's, I think, I mean, as I said, I'm speaking very personally. I am wholeheartedly behind it, and I'm also drinks. So, trying to find my equivalent, and actually, I'll throw one in here that's completely random. But there's a bar there's a Italy, which is an Italian restaurant in London near Liverpool Street. Has my favourite alcohol-free drink ever. That is now my favourite drink ever. That I will literally go to that bar to go and get. If I'm getting a train home, I'll try and make like 20 minutes so I can just go and buy it. It's expensive. It's £8, so it's a real treat to be able to have this thing. It's called Bacchus, and it's made from a red wine reduction and some Italian.
Yeah, I think when I think back, similar to you, I think we were both from slightly staggered generations, but generations where we grew up around alcohol and that kind of thing, and early years would be centered around that most weekends and that kind of thing. And I think for me, I started to slow down when we had the children. That was a big thing for me because I just couldn't get up in the night or whatever I needed to do with that. And I think I've always been able to kind of give and take it. It hasn't something that I've held in that high regard to things that I like. If we're talking about food, then that might be a different conversation. But for alcohol, it wasn't something that I think, and that's pretty much continued to the present day. I'll have two from a celebration. We celebrate with point of view if you're at a wedding or that kind of stuff as a toast. But day to day, it's all right. And because there are so many options now, for me, it's just the great things like you can still enjoy a drink and then, be able to go and pick your daughter up in 20 minutes, and not having to change things like that. You can drive to a function and drive back and, that kind of thing. And you also got to remember that the kind of like the sugar content is quite high with a lot of alcoholic beverages. So for me, who has quite a sensitivity to sugar, that was a big factor as well. And that sensitivity to sugar can impact my own sort of mental health and that kind of thing. I'm really only in sort of more recent years I've kind of found that out, but it was really enlightening for me that something like sugar can have a real kind of impact on my body, my mind, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting, really.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that as well, and I think again very similarly, I'm not teetotal entirely. I definitely have a drink now and then. I've just had a glass of wine, for example, with dinner. But I embrace, as I said, like far more the culture of reducing judgment and expectation around, I suppose, around alcohol. And about the relationship it serves. I think actually two examples you just talked about, I literally did so last weekend went out with my wife and I decided not to drink and drive, and it was quite a big sort of going out night. So it was expected that I wouldn't do that. So that was one where I said had a few alcohol-free beers and I navigated that. And then another thing, just because the other side to this is that there are products becoming available. I don't know if you've ever experienced, but they have a functional impact in terms of they can have the impact as alcohol would do, but don't have herbal. Have you ever heard that?
No. Right. So break this down for me. So they give.
I promise this is not an advertorial, but I can show you. Because randomly, I literally
product
have one
placement
here.
coming.
Yeah, literally, yeah.
Oh.
Sentia. So is the brand.
Just pause there for the thumbnail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So talk me through this. So what does it do?
So
what does it do?
Basically what it does, it tricks the brain into and it's about our serotonin and the receptors and our GABA system, which again I'm not going to go into any of that, but basically what it does is it mimics the effect of alcohol because of what it does to our brain.
So the pleasure.
the pleasure. Well, there's two. So
Okay.
they have like, either it's a lean in or a lean back drink. So either you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
have like the
yeah.
red wine effect, which is something where you can relax more, or you're going to have a shot of Jaeger, which is more the black, lean in, for example. But then completely non-alcoholic, really random. But they don't taste great, if I'm honest.
Okay.
But they do make you feel tipsy, but there's zero side effects. So I don't know. This is a completely new market.
So you can drive on this. You can.
Yeah, they say they advise they, and it's
I was going to say, because if it
thing.
makes you feel kind of.
Well, yeah. So legally, yes, you could drive. There's nothing around. But they do not advise to drive.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of these new emerging kind of grey area type things.
Yeah, yeah.
So
again, I don't mean to have taken it at all off topic, but it's kind of
No,
in
it's
this
fine.
world of like people that don't drink or drinking far less, seeing in.
So that's really interesting. So I'm kind of thinking of like where we were with non-alcoholic beer like 10 years ago or somewhere like that, where it tasted a bit rubbish. No one really quite opted for it, but it is something that sounds like it's going to be something that is emerging now. Is there much of a market for it now?
Yeah, so interesting. There is, and the future actually that again, and this is the vision of, for example, this company, but of like that whole sector is that you take alcohol out of the market and you replace it with something that is not alcoholic. So but you have exactly the same product. It tastes exactly the same, and it has a similar effect, but it doesn't have any side effect. Yeah, so it's kind of like, if you imagine 10 years down the line, because again, this is meant to be licensed in 2027, for example, like when ingredient in it that
Herbal
doesn't taste the same.
element to it.
It won't be herbal. It'll be standardised.
This is the future, people. You heard it here first from Joe. We're going to be having this stuff in the future. I think it sounds great. My only concern is this kind of like still has the effect to some description, and how you manage that, being able to go to work on it or drive on it or whatever. Yeah. Interesting.
Someone else to work out, but yeah.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to jump on to the last one, which we shared today, and it was around kind of like how do we make mental health services like counselling, therapy more accessible, and it speaks to the fact that yes, there is a route where you can go to your GP, you can have a conversation, you could be referred to a mental health service within the NHS, but more often than not there's a very long waiting list for that, or maybe you only get a certain amount of time allocated to you as part of that journey, and there are lots of other options available to you, but they are at a cost, and it's not something which I feel is accessible to everyone. So the article speaks to what can we do about this. Thoughts on this one, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say and talk about, and I suppose I'm not entirely sure where to start. But what I suppose the thing I would echo is 100% making, and I might even just remove the word therapy, but working on our emotions more accessible, and understanding ourselves more accessible. Because I think that even the word therapy can be triggering, and also puts it in a bucket, in a certain like, right, I've already classified that as this thing, versus what if I said to you, you could go for a run, and at the same time you are working on your mental fitness, or I said to you, you are doing X, you're journaling, and at the same time you're doing X, and I think that for me it's reframing. Or you are having a conversation with somebody, and let's call it just a conversation, not therapy. Let's call it something else. And I think for me, there's this whole challenge. I know I've sort of gone perhaps somewhere tangentially, which is like sideways rather than the topic itself. But I think there's a whole still issue around the stigma there. And I suppose that where I'm coming at it is we need to address that first and foremost before you even get to the accessibility of therapy. And I know what we're saying is there's a huge over demand of people wanting that product. We're overwhelmed and it costs way too much from a private perspective. There's not enough of but I also believe that we're needing to change our relationship with what therapy is and what it can actually do, because I don't believe that it can do everything, and I don't think it should be seen, and a lot of people won't ever see it as like the panacea or like the thing that's going to change anything. But I think, and I agree with everything that was said in the article around increasing accessibility, and I think even the first part of the article, you know, we list out like 4 different types of therapy, which, you know, when you break it down, like one of them is actually just could be the culmination of all of those things. The challenge is you come into this market and you're like, I just needed some help. Like I needed some help, and I was told I need to talk to somebody. Like, let's simplify that rather than overcomplicate it with different things that I'm meant to be doing. Let's simplify the route to it and the way in which we describe it to make it more accessible. Like, even interestingly, accessible has different dimensions of what that word means. Like, let's make it accessible from a cost perspective, 100%. Let's also make it accessible in terms of understanding what it actually is. And it is just a conversation with somebody that you're going to have, where hopefully you're able to share and discuss anything that you feel, and that person is there to help you and be alongside you. How many people, again, do we describe it as that? Do we break it down? And I suppose I've personally have had a lot of therapy, and I've had a lot of the psychodynamic, the CBT, a few different things, and all of them have been very helpful. What I would say is nothing was more helpful than acknowledging the role I played within that, and actually some of the more basic things around self-care, which again I know that's related to this topic, but I think that, like, you know very much, I've been very heavily involved in a mental health charity called Talk Club, and we are access to therapy more accessible by reducing the cost.
I think the good news is, like you say, you know, you guys at Talk Club and similar type organisations are kind of building that bridge from therapy and counselling to someone that hasn't done it before. And the way in which you do that is by, again, having another layer down from that, which is a listening type scenario, a listening group, whereby, you know, you correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, but, you know, the guys come along and they share, or they choose not to share if they don't want to, and it's purely on a listening basis. You know, there's I think I'm right in saying that you don't give advice or you don't give anything extra unless you want to be kind of signposted to stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other there's a massive difference between therapy and what we do at Talk Club, and that is the problems or challenges that will be aired they're not there to be fixed, and they're not there to be fixed by anyone. They're there, as you say, purely as a listening and talking experience, and one that we see as preventative to poor mental health, the potential need to receive therapy. But what we are basically, you've just described it, mainly let's call it a triage for accessing potentially mental health services, and even understanding our relationship to what we might need. You know, you come to a Talk Club.
I think it's a great gateway, because it kind of, as you say, you know, for that person that's kind of new to this whole conversation, a lot of the time what they aren't getting, which can be so powerful, is just purely to share those thoughts and feelings with another person. You know, they don't have that access to that, maybe in their family, in their workplace, or in their friendship group. And then you're exactly right. I think once you get an understanding of, you know, okay, well, I've been along to Talk Club or another group, and I understand that, I might need some assistance, then I feel then you're more equipped to then go and have a conversation to someone about what you need to do next, which is great, rather than going straight from, I feel like this, doctor, what do I do, type thing, or that kind of thing. And we should also say that, you know, by all means, you know, if you have anything, if you're feeling in a certain way, GP is the quickest route to that, and you should have that conversation as quickly as you need to. But yeah, and exactly as you say, accessibility is different things. It could be money, it could be time, it could be, you know, we all have these constraints within ourselves, and I think the aim or the hope is that in the future there will be so many options that there will be kind of routes that are kind of enticing for lots of different sorts of people, and certainly that's, you know, that's one of the hopes and dreams of Talk Club, I bet.
Yeah, and again, I did not want this to be a Talk Club promotion. That wasn't the point from my perspective. It was much more about exploring, I suppose, the differences, how it relates to therapy potentially, but also the other thing, because the article when we were talking about it was about the increasing funding, the promotion of it, and raising awareness. And I think the other thing is actually delivering a service. Like there are other ways that you can. My concern,
I guess, my concern is for that person that goes to the GP. They maybe complete a questionnaire. They have a conversation with the GP. They, you know, I feel like this. I feel like that. They then referred, and then there could be months to wait to be accessing a service. And then what happens in that time period in between? You know, when they're at a point where they really feel that they need it. Because, you know, it's at that time when it's most wanted, and I appreciate there's lots of different factors around that, but, you know, the article mentions, again, speaking about a service here in Suffolk Mind, they have a, you know, in regards to counselling, in regards to just having a conversation with someone on a regular basis about things that are going on in your life and kind of working through stuff. They have a tiered system. So, you know, if you work full-time, it's a certain amount of money per session. If you work part-time, it's a certain amount per session. If you're on certain benefits, it's a certain amount. So the tier comes down in the service charge depending on your... So I think that kind of thinking is going to be instrumental in kind of bridging that gap some way. Because, it's just a real... I just really feel for that, you know, for those people that are, you know, have this kind of... It's not excitement because, you know, they're feeling in a certain way, but they said, right, I'm going to get this sorted out now. I've gone to the GP. The GP agrees with me. The GP's referred me. And then what now? You know? Yeah. And it's not immediately come to them. So, you know, they're then in a space where they really need help. And, you know, I think the more we can talk about things like Talk Club, where there's kind of that bridging thing as well, you know, and those sorts of organisations, and these other options that we have now where there's kind of staggered service charges depending on your situation, you know, we just need to push more in this way, I think.
Yeah. Ross, I'm asking, and it's related to something.
Sure, go for it.
Which is that they have a tool.
Mental health toolkit. Yeah, they're great. It's a shame I've got them in my bag somewhere. They are amazing. Yeah. And exactly as you say, you know, sometimes when you just... I think for me, in my experience... in the past when I had certain challenges, I thought to the extent it was about this tangible thing that I was holding on to that I thought was the problem. I thought this was the challenge. What the work with Suffolk Mind and, you know, this approach enabled me to do was in fact look at... I'm going to talk about buckets again. I always talk about buckets. So there's lots of different buckets around me, and one is sleep, and one is food, and one is exercise, and one is thing. And looking at, when you're in that situation, looking at your buckets around you and saying, look, how full are they? How full are they on different, you know, is my sleep not as great at the moment? Okay, so how can I improve my sleep? I'm eating quite a high sugar diet, or maybe I'm eating quite a lot of takeaways or something like that. Okay, the bucket is quite empty. Let's try and improve what I'm putting in my body. What you find, and it's kind of like, it's almost magic in a way, because when you start to build those things around you and bolster that framework to you, the good news is that in some circumstances, not all, because everyone's different, but in some circumstances, you start to feel a little bit better. And you start to feel a little bit better in one area, and it's kind of like a slow snowball effect. It picks up in another area, it picks up another area, and when you start to feel better, you may feel better in this area, and when you start to feel better in that area, you start to feel better in that area. And it was a bit of a game changer for me in understanding what our needs are and how we kind of put them to the side and sometimes focus on this thing that we think is the problem, and sometimes that is the problem, but in a lot of scenarios, it's the wider holistic viewpoint, I think. You agree with that, Joe? That's good. Okay, again, something we could talk about for a long time, but we haven't got the time, unfortunately. If you want to check out all those articles, you can have a look at them on livegoodenough.com. There was also some other articles we shared this week. One was around the use of antibiotics and oral sensitivity in neurodivergent people. And, we're in 2024. Why can't we create, medication that tastes nice? I think we've all had penicillin at some time in our lives, and it's not a nice situation, especially for those that have sensitivities. And we also talked about allotments. Are allotments a cool thing to do now, or have they always been cool? Because there's a lot of benefits that come out of the allotment. I kind of for a long time thought it was something that only granddads and stuff do, but there's a huge, amazing community out there, community gardens and all this sorts of stuff where you can get so much benefit out of. So we talk about that as well. Is that it? That is it. It's 5, isn't it? It's 5. 1 a day. Okay. I'll stop now because we're out of time. Again, if you want to get in touch with us, please do. You can get in touch via the website livegoodenough.com, or wherever you see this podcast, listen to this podcast on Spotify and YouTube. Leave us a comment. But until next week, live good enough, and we'll see you soon. Take care.